When the First World War ended in 1918, Long Island's flat Hempstead Plains beckoned veteran and hopeful aviators to come push away the confines of lift, speed, and distance, to fly higher, further, and faster than even the most resolute hearts thought possible. The brave took those odds and turned Long Island into the cradle of American aviation. Increasing numbers of planes of all shapes and sizes rose from Long Island, from what would become Roosevelt Field and Curtis Field next to it, from the Army's Mitchell Field to the south, from North Beach to the west, now LaGuardia, and from Floyd Bennett in Brooklyn. Aircraft designers and manufacturers, each in the race to be first with the latest developments in airframes, instruments, and engines, set up shop along the perimeters of those fields and in surrounding neighborhoods. By 1920, the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Corporation of Garden City, founded by Glenn Curtiss, was already a name with its pusher biplane and Jenny, first to fly the mail, and its NC-4 four-engine amphibian built for the Navy. When NCs 1, 2, and 3 foundered in storms and in an accident, the NC-4, leaving from Long Island, and after stopping only in Newfoundland and the Azores, became the first aircraft to cross the Atlantic when it splashed down in Lisbon, Portugal. By 1927, Roosevelt Field had become headquarters for those determined to be the first to cross the Atlantic nonstop. A young airmail pilot named Charles Lindbergh arrived from the west, climbed into his Spirit of St. Louis, took off toward the east, and in just 30 hours, 29 minutes landed in France, opening a new era in aviation. Seahawks, Army-Navy racers, pursuit planes, and passenger transports rolled out of the Curtiss factory on Clinton Road in Garden City and on to Long Island's runways. Lawrence Sperry built his nimble Sperry Messenger in Farmingdale. Then in 1929, based on Sperry's pioneering work, we finally found a way to fly solely on instruments without any visual reference to the outside world. Flying from Mitchell Field in a hooded cockpit, Lieutenant Jimmy Doolittle proved it was possible to fly blind by relying entirely on Sperry's gyroscopic instruments. It made round-the-clock, all-weather flying possible. The Vought Company of Long Island City built Corsairs designed to operate on a carrier. At least that was the idea. It just took a while. The Grumman Company of Bethpage produced a series of biplane Navy fighters in the 1930s, including the popular F-3F, which led to a long line of successful naval aircraft. Racing pilot and aircraft designer Alexander D. Seversky became a major contributor with his famous P-35 pursuit plane, built in Farmingdale, seen being flown here by the famed aviatrix Jackie Cochran. Igor Sikorsky began building a successful line of amphibians on Long Island in the 1920s and 30s. American Aeronautical in Port Washington built Italian seaplanes and flying boats. Fairchild built its utility monoplanes in Farmingdale and designed and built Richard E. Byrd's famous Stars and Stripes that he would fly to Antarctica, where he'd spend 146 hours photomapping the frozen region. The Remington Burnelli Aircraft Company in Amityville built the first 20-passenger commercial airliner. But the inspiration to design and manufacture these machines, to develop aviation into a usable passenger and freight service, came from the visionary individuals who daily put their lives on the line. Frank Hawks, flying his low-wing Travel Air, sped from Curtiss Field, Long Island to Glendale Airport near Los Angeles in just under 15 hours. Returning, he broke his own west-east record by clocking in at just 12 hours, 25 minutes. Freeport teenager Eleanor Smith, who would be voted America's best woman pilot in 1929, broke the solo endurance record by staying aloft in a Balanca for 26 and a half hours. In a reach for the altitude record, she passed out over New York when her oxygen tube slipped from her mouth. She recovered in the nick of time to live for a second try. This time, she broke through an astonishing 34,000 feet. Wiley Post taking off from Roosevelt Field showed it was possible to circle the globe. There were successes and spectacular failures. People paid with their lives. One Long Islander wrote, "Every night before going to sleep, I'd make a list of all the pilots on Long Island who had been killed. But I stopped counting when the list reached 100. Roosevelt, Mitchell, and Curtis Fields, Floyd Bennett, and North Beach became America's frontier aviation town to veteran flyers and newcomers. But the largest number of bona fide flying schools in all of America could be found at Roosevelt Field." In the 1920s and 30s, crowds flocked to Roosevelt Field to watch daredevils as they looped and spun their monoplanes and biplanes, sometimes carrying wing walkers or spilling parachutists behind them. Wealthy individuals and companies wanting to identify with the glamour and excitement of aviation would offer huge cash prizes to the winners of air races and flying derbies. Several national air races were held on Long Island in the 1920s and 30s. By the end of the 1930s, what had begun as a sport in the teens and 20s began to take on the more serious tone of a rapidly growing commercial industry. Long Island's men and women, with vision and a dream, were responsible for it, for turning the world's attention from unimagined possibilities to stunning realities. The plucky Viola Gentry, colorful speed king Roscoe Turner and his Lion Cub, Navy racing pilot Al Williams, the internationally popular aviatrix Amelia Earhart, Alexander D. Seversky, Frank Hawks, Richard Byrd, Jimmy Doolittle, Wrong Way Corrigan, and all the unknown folks, the designers, builders, and mechanics who worked in the factories without any promise of glory, the men and women who tested and flew the new machines. Their trials, victories, and defeats, their antics, their grit in confronting the unknown, we celebrate their spirit of discovery. It's our way of remembering and thanking them.